Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. This is episode number 257 with my guest, composer, guitarist, and now retired Princeton educator, Steve Mackey. Steve has been in So Percussion's world since I joined the group. He was playing in a duo with Jason, an improv duo with Jason Truding when I joined the group, and wrote us a piece called It Is Time, which kind of changed our lives as an ensemble. It was one of the first pieces that sort of forced So to be a band rather than, say, all of us playing the exact same setups. Steve was an amateur skier that was endorsed. He's also a great tennis player, composer. He still is a tennis player and composer and skier. He's writing a concerto for us coming up here soon. But he also just is a fascinating guy. And I really enjoy talking with Steve anytime I get a chance, so I hope you enjoy this as well. All right, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Steve Mackey.
Yeah.
All right, well then let's, I think I'm rolling on my end. Let's gavel this to order. Stephen Mackey, welcome to the podcast. And I've known you now for about 20 years since I joined, so not as intimately as my colleague Jason does. And I've rebooted my podcast for several reasons. I took about 2 years off for a million reasons, but one of them, I just kind of got tired of talking to people. And, there was a pandemic, there was a lot of stuff going on, but I couldn't figure out, I didn't think that was true. And what I got tired of actually was I was less interested in talking to people my own age. And please don't take this as anything other than respect. You're 70 years old, is that correct?
I am 70 years old, brother. I am way older than you. I am not your age.
No, and I have found that some of the most enjoyable conversations I've had have been with people who have lived a full life and are continuing to do so. So, I knew about you when I was an undergrad, and I think a lot of folks maybe, if they want to know about the sort of nickel and dime tour of Steve Mackey and your compositional output, there's plenty of places they can go to find that. The one thing I never was told when I was a student, I opened up the score to see you Thursday, and I thought to myself, nope, I can't play that. That's way too hard. So I'll start with something a little easier. Micro concerto, same deal. But the thing that they never told me was that you were 10 years old at one point, just like me. It's the thing, like when you look up to people, all of your heroes, the people you're told, like, this is what you should be shooting for, they were all 10 years old at some point. And I'm curious, Steve, if you wouldn't mind sort of taking me back and telling me a little bit about what was 10-year-old Steve Mackey like?
Well, one thing I will say, a 10-year-old Steve Mackey had absolutely no idea about what I do now. I mean, I had no idea that what I do now existed, not even a periphery. I mean, I knew about music because my mother was a Frank Sinatra fan, and every Christmas I could, be depended upon to get my mom a Frank Sinatra record. My parents sang around the house all the time. My mother did some semi-professional singing, but they were not interested in classical music, and I didn't, Frank Sinatra, like rock music, that I got interested in a few years later. It's a very permeable membrane between composer and performer. There's just even though somebody wrote those songs that Frank Sinatra sang, it was Frank Sinatra. And certainly when we get into a few years later, not that many years later, actually, in fact, 0 years later, the Rolling Stones, and I get started. This is when I actually started playing guitar. I Can't Get No Satisfaction. That's the Rolling Stones, and they sing it. I'd never thought of any separate person composing it. And actually, you hit the right age, because I was 10 years old when I started a new school in Marysville, California, after having been living in England My father worked for the government, so I was born in Germany. I lived on Guam. I lived in Mexico City. I
I
lived
don't
in
mean to
Japan.
interrupt you, but that was you know, whatever. Like I said, I've known you for 20 years, but I didn't know you were born in Frankfurt, Germany. For some reason,
Yeah,
that had never. And so you said your father worked for the government.
worked for the
What
U.S. government,
what did
civil
he?
service. He was a his title would be in various postings budget officer,
Okay,
which is basically an accountant. He
yeah.
was like took care of the books as a civil servant. You know, I think the rule was that you know, not an actual military personnel couldn't have that position. This was, you know, civilian oversight
Mm,
of military budgets. And
whoa.
so it wasn't, you know, he was a glorified accountant. It wasn't a big fancy job. We were middle class. And I mean, I remember also around the age of 10 when my dad uh, lost his 2 week paycheck. He was paid in cash, uh, and or maybe he got a check and cashed it right away. But he lost that paycheck, and for 2 weeks we were like, you know, whoa, what are we gonna, you know, how are we gonna do this? When my mother died, she left me their life savings of $12,000.
It,
So.
I mean, what? Although I have so many questions. I mean, I could go down the rabbit hole of just of like your dad was an accountant, lost the wad of envelope, the wad of cash that was given.
Yeah,
It's like
yeah, yeah,
it just
yeah,
boggles my mind.
yeah. Well, he always said, you know, there's no way. You know, he worked for Uncle Sam
Uh huh.
for 40 years. He said, "There's no way I could have worked for the same employer if I didn't actually change jobs every 2 years." So, as a not as a civil servant, civilian,
Hmm.
he didn't get transferred like a military personnel. They tell you where to go. He
Mm.
would be, you know, we were say in Banbury, England. He worked at Upper Hayford Air Force Base.
Okay.
He was particularly connected to the Air Force, and you know, we stayed there until he saw this posting at Beale Air Force Base in Northern California,
Hmm.
and my parents had romanticized California,
Uh-huh.
and for good reason. It's an awesome
Were
place.
they born there or like where?
No, my mother was born in Pittsburgh, and my dad was born in, you know, bumfuck Minnesota. Um,
An actual
you know,
town? You can look it up.
yeah,
It's right
yeah,
there.
you know, just on a farm. Eight,
BUMB. Fuck.
yeah, eight kids,
Uh
you
huh.
know,
Uh-huh.
sharing one pair of shoes, walking uphill both ways to
Right.
school. Um, and so, but you know, they'd been to California. My mother had, if you ever saw this piece of my memoir,
Hmm.
my mother traveled to L.A. During the golden age of Hollywood, and you know, like the war years, right after the war,
Hmm.
she was there, and so you know, just the weather, and my mother was, you know, taken by the glamour
Hmm.
of those golden years of Hollywood, and my dad liked the idea of the weather, having grown up in Minnesota of all
Yeah. Yeah.
places.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, he waited for he saw this posting in Northern California. We took it and we moved there. And prior to that, I was kind of a loner because we moved all the time. My
Yeah.
parents loved to travel. My dad would get sick of a boss, and he wouldn't have to quit his job. He just moved to another franchise, you know. So I had this heavy. I started school in England, and I had this heavy British accent when I was 10 years old, and we moved to a very rural community, Marysville, California. It's in the Central Valley. It's like 50 miles straight north of Sacramento.
Okay.
Um, all my summer jobs were in agriculture. I went to school later on. I went to high school with dudes with driving pickups with gun racks
Hmm.
in
Hmm.
the you know in the cab.
Yep.
I once, again, jumping ahead to high school, I once had a guy um, grab me by my shoulder length hair, break a beer bottle on a chair, hold the jagged edge of the beer bottle up to my face, and say, "Hey, Mackey, when are you going to cut your hair?" So
Well,
there
this
were,
that I mean this sort of like I want to come back a little bit to the Rolling Stones. So like you were 10 years old living in England
yeah,
when the Rolling Stones, also this would have been 1966,
yeah, yeah.
with the Beatles were also
Beatles
a
were,
thing.
yeah, we
Like,
moved to the States right then. As soon as we moved, soon after we moved, the Beatles appeared on the Ed Sullivan
right.
Show.
Well, I mean,
And
this is
and people assumed that since I had a British accent, I must play the guitar. That's in Marysville, California.
right.
So I was standing around the playground with my British accent, trying to fit in, and some said, "Well, Mackey, you talk like you're one of the Beatles. You must play the guitar." And rather than he was trying to humiliate me, and rather than give in so easily, I said, "Yeah." I didn't play the guitar. I just lied, and he took it over. Thinking, "Oh, awesome!" Because we're going to start a band. We're going to play in the talent show, the fifth grade talent show, and we need a guitar player. And so we play guitar in our band, and I said, "Yeah." I hadn't.
You lied again.
I had no experience with any of that. Went home. My brother, who is 10 years older than me, so he was, he had a guitar. And I just, sort of liberated his guitar from his room. And luckily, the song they were playing was "I Can't Get No Satisfaction" by the Stones, which went bum, 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 bum. You can play it on one finger, passively. And so I learned that, played in the fifth grade talent show. We didn't win, but I covered my lie. And that is the beginning of my musical career.
What was it like growing up in England? I mean, you hear a lot of stories about my mom when she was a kid, like the sort of like the crazy energy that came around from when the Beatles appear on the Ed Sullivan Show, and you hear these stories like they hit that last note, they unplug and they bow, and it's like, well, the reason they do that is because they had played like 1,000 shows in Hamburg, Germany, on like some random festival that they all had to plug into amps that were already on stage, and they unplugged and the next band walked up, but that was the YouTube of the day. That's when people discovered the Beatles and really heard, saw them in real life with their long hair.
Yeah, I knew them before because I had been in England. So when the Beatles showed up at the Ed Sullivan Show, it was like, I know these guys.
What was that? What was that like as a 10-year-old to be sort of like, that's like, I don't think when I was 10, I was ever in the know in a way that the entire country wasn't yet, with anything in my life.
Yeah. Well, a couple of reasons. One, I had two older brothers, 15 years older and 10 years older.
Okay.
So when I was a little kid, they were teenagers, and they were playing this music, the Beatles and Chubby Checker, "Let's Twist Again like we did last summer," all this music. My 15-year-old, the brother that was 15 years older than me, was like almost another generation musically. He was like, doo-wop, Chuck Berry, 50s stuff, what I would later call oldies. The one that was 10 years older than me, got me in, kind of an early education into, what for you is classic rock, what for me is rock. I mean, it was still on the early side, but certainly the Beatles. I remember he bought me the first Crosby, Stills and Nash album. He bought me the White Album. He bought me Disraeli Gears Cream, the White Album, Abbey Road. Yeah, all that stuff. And so also the place. This is Northern California, and we're approaching the Summer of Love, 1967, and the hippie movement. Friends of my brothers were running away from home and moving to Haight-Ashbury and moving to San Francisco and doing something in, peace, love. It was already a strong movement by that point. In fact, we would have visitors from my parents' many travels all over the world. They collected a lot of friends, and they would visit us in California. And one of the things we would do is go to Haight-Ashbury and look at the hippies. And, music was all tied up with that whole movement, that cultural movement. Anti-war, just the anti-establishment, anti-war, anti-military industrial complex, all that stuff was tied up at that time, and in particular in that place. I was an hour and a half from San Francisco.
I mean, it's amazing to me. One of the things that I'm I'm sort of quietly a history nerd, and specifically like World War I and World War II. And one of the things that interests me in talking to folks who were either kids post World War II, obviously then through Korean War and Vietnam and all those, there's a lot of stuff that happened in there. I'm very curious what was in the conversations, like you hear about the Summer of Love, but it's like in the reaction to the Vietnam War and all of these, all of this stuff. But it's like, I don't know, like we're 25 years out from 9/11, and the consequences of that are we're still dealing with it, and it's still in the air in the way that we talk about politics and all these things. You were a kid. You were born in 1956. This was 10 years after Nuremberg. Like
10, yeah.
Like
10 years after World War II.
What was how was the air? Like, what was in the air whenever you were a kid? Like, what were the things that, I mean, not that you understood it at 10 years old necessarily, but like, what were?
Well, I did understand the sort of the concept and the context of what it meant to be a boomer, what the baby boom was, the sort of the 50s America on top of the world, and then but the kind of socially prescriptive aspects of being on top of the world, being rebelled against. I mean, I understood that with my older brothers. I saw that tension between my brothers and my father, who was a military, government employee, and so I felt not that far away from World War II. I mean, I think of this often. Movies made right after, during World War II, I saw, in the early 60s, so maybe 20 years later, I could understand a World War II movie, Patton or something like that. I could understand those movies, and now I think I am 40 years away from the movie Back to the Future, which I watch a couple times every year, So it's a trip, but I was really a firsthand sort of Forrest Gump-like witness to the tension between my brothers and my father, vis-a-vis the military-industrial complex and father knows best world, and this other world of no, we don't want that. We don't want your prescription. My father, bless his heart, had a turnaround. I mean, when I was 13, not that many years later, I wanted to have long hair because I wanted to let my freak flag fly, as they say, and I went to the barber. My dad said, you got to go get a haircut. I got a haircut and just got, just a little trim.
More of a trim, yeah.
Just a slight trim. And my dad was pissed. And it was the only time he ever hit me. And it was a sort of glancing blow, but, he was aiming at my head, but then corrected course at the last minute. So he'd hit my shoulder. Yeah. And of course, my mom was outraged, and it was a big deal. And so I guess the next year we moved to Tacoma, Washington, so that my dad could take this higher paying position and put himself in a better place for retirement. And this school that we went to had a dress code. You had to have your hair cut above your ears. And my father at that point had done a lot of soul searching. He'd already said to me, it's ridiculous for our relationship to be challenged by your hair. I'm sorry for that. And he apologized. And then in Tacoma, first thing he did is took me to a wig store to buy a short-haired wig so that I wouldn't have to cut my hair, so I could stuff my hair under my short-haired wig, and at 3 o'clock, rip it off, and my hair would come.
Are you serious, Steve? So you were 13 years old wearing a wig at school.
Well, that was 13 is when my dad tried to hit
the hair off your head. Yeah.
But then and then apologize. And then by the time I was 14, it was his idea. He said, if I'm not going to tell my son how to wear his hair, no school board is going to tell him how to wear his hair.
Steve, that is such. Oh my God, you need to write a piece about that particular
Yeah.
aspect of your
Yeah.
life. I mean, what was it common? Were a lot of your friends also wearing wigs, or were you the
No.
only kid with a hairpiece at school?
Yeah, I was the only, because this was in Tacoma, Washington, so they hadn't gotten the memo yet. So down in California, by that point, the Marysville High School didn't have you could wear your hair as long as they knew better, and that memo had not yet reached Tacoma, so I was the only one, but it gave me some street cred,
Did people know? Did your
Yeah,
classmates know?
I would very, very publicly, as soon as the bell rang, boom.
Honestly, Steve, I feel like that, I don't want to speak for you, but I imagine that has influenced the way you see music and composition, and you're sort of, not rebellious is the wrong word, but creative rebellion. Like, you're like, yes, F the man, but I have to get into this institution, so I'll wear a wig, but when I'm done, I'm ripping it.
Yeah, I like to think of it, and this is, I think of my relationship to music as a latecomer, classical music, as a healthy irreverence.
Well, okay, so now I could talk about your wigs all day, but I want to bring it back to, so you're playing guitar still. When did was music still something that, like, when you came home and no one was looking, you were playing your guitar, or what?
Absolutely. Well, yeah, yeah, I mean, I realized that I was more serious than the band that I played I Can't Get No Satisfaction in. I realized that I really dug this, and I had according to my brother was very, very encouraging, because I could listen to a record and pick stuff off. I never took a guitar lesson. Everything I learned from listening to records and stealing it off of records, and that impressed my brother. And he said, you take the guitar, you're he would, very sweet. He would say, "You're a genius. You're a musical genius." And so,
were you? When I say musically literate, I don't mean there's bad connotations that come with that. But were you writing stuff down, or was it all?
Oh no, I didn't know how to read music at all.
Okay,
no.
all right.
I didn't know anything about notation. Like I said, everything I learned about the guitar was, listening, Jimmy Page, Led Zeppelin, listening to those records, stealing those chords, stealing those solos. Every once in a while, like, there'd be some older kid that I'd smoke weed with, and this one kid named Mike Burrows, showed me some stuff, some chords, and but it was all an oral tradition for sure.
So as you were going through, as you're saying that, I was I wasn't as obsessed with percussion maybe as you were with guitar. I was kind of a late bloomer. I was more inspired. My fifth grade drum teacher, Joan Wenzel, I just couldn't believe that some lady got to talk about drums all day. I was like, that's insane. My dad loaded, 7-Up bottling company trucks at 4 a.m. My mom taught at a rural high school, and I was like, but this lady just talks about drums all day. This in a steel band, that's fucking rad,
Yeah.
And I remember going to her and saying, the end of my junior year, going into my senior year, where you went to a career fair, and you had to sort of like make a call. And I was like, I want to do what you do, Ms. Wenzel. And she's like, you can't read music. And I was like, well, isn't that kind of your fault? Like, you were my I picked things up by ear. I memorized things pretty quickly. And so we just crammed. I had to learn where middle C was. And like, I couldn't sight read very well. My auditions, I came in and somebody put up music and was like, could you read this? And I was like, I'm not going to waste your time. And honestly, I think what got me into college was just that honesty. It was like, no, we're never getting this time back. I'll figure it out later. But right now, not worth your time. For you, was there a moment, like, how did you sort of turn the page into the next chapter?
So I got I was very serious. I practiced as much as any violinist practiced, I mean, I was, like you said, I was playing the guitar if nobody was looking. I was playing the guitar when people were looking. I mean, I would play the guitar, while watching TV, I just, play scales, if it's like family movie night. I remember taking a trip to see my parents' family in Minnesota in a van, and I sat in the van and just played guitar the whole 2,000 miles 2,000 miles there.
Either get your 10,000 hours or your 2,000 miles worth of playing, and you'll be just fine.
Did. Yeah. But I was also a very enthusiastic and, I'll say, talented skier. My body was made for skiing. Skiers are not tall. Skiers have my body. I've got big piston-sized quads. Even before I started skiing and working out, I took to skiing like that. My oldest brother took me skiing. Again, remember, I'm 10. He's 25. He's teaching high school. Single guy living in Sacramento, joins the Sacramento Ski Club. They have a lodge. Yeah, come skiing, Steve. He liked me. We liked each other. He was kind of a nerd. So by the time I started really listening to being discriminating about my rock music and smoking weed, I introduced him to all those things. I would take him to, let's go see this band Jethro Tull, and we'd go see rock bands. And he was a nerd, so he liked my company. 15 years of difference. We were sort of mature at the same level.
He was also probably impressed that his younger brother found a metal or rock band with a flute player.
Yeah.
Like, how did he find this unicorn? This guy is a genius.
Yeah. So and I was again playing in bands, and but he started me though before that around age 10, just taking me skiing. And I took to it like that. I mean, I could just do it. I got good balance. And so all through high school, started doing that. I became a sponsored freestyle skier. Took a year off of college where I was just skiing for a ski company, Hart Skis, and still playing in my band, still trying to, be a rock star.
What were you majoring in at college at the time?
Well, I was, I took a year off, but I was majoring in pre-med. And my plan was that I was going to be an orthopedic surgeon, fix broken bones 2 days a week in a ski area, and ski 5 days a week,
As one does.
Yeah. Then I had a career-ending injury skiing, and I went back and devoted myself to college and continued. I was good at math and chemistry and physics, but then particularly liked physics. So I switched over to a physics major. But I was still playing in my band. I was like, I'm going to be a rock star, but being a physics professor seemed like a good backup position. I liked contemplating the cosmos. At a certain point, though, I realized some things came together. 3 things came together. One was I realized that my friends in physics could all do practical things. They could fix a toaster or change the oil on their car. And I did great grade-wise in physics, but it was like a theoretical physics. What am I going to do? Design, weapons of mass destruction, or what? I didn't see. Again, we're talking, at a time where that flower power mentality still had a hold on me. Still does, for that matter. So that was one thing. The other thing is my band is out. We're playing gigs, trying to play originals, and we get people in the audience drunk, play the Doobie Brothers. And I'm like, oh, okay. And so, operating on a sleep deficit, trying to go to school, playing this band, and trying to get to the next level with the band, getting rejection letters from presenters and club owners saying, oh, yeah, your band is really tight. You really know how to play your instruments, but, your originals are kind of weird and hard to dance to. So then the third element is I had to take something in the arts area. So I decided to take a music appreciation course, just a, gut music, what we'd call a clapping for credit at Princeton. And had a great teacher who was a, semester long course, or on the quarter system, a quarter long course. But in the first couple of weeks, did a kind of an overview of Gregorian chant to George Crumb Black Angels, with in between Monteverdi madrigals, Mozart piano concertos, late Beethoven string quartets, Stravinsky ballets, and like particularly the Rite of Spring and Petrushka, Firebird, Stravinsky ballets. I was like, well, this music is the most psychedelic acid prog rock I'd ever heard. It's weird and hard to dance to, and people dance to it. And not only that, when you go to a concert, people sit and they listen. And, composer John Harbison once said to me, "You never escaped the music you loved when you were 17. And I think that's true. And it's also like, what is music for? And at age 17, music was put my headphones on, 2 a.m., lie on my bedroom floor, and just let it take me someplace, That age, my mother was a practicing alcoholic, so there was that escape value too, and that, kind of trauma therapy that it had. So it was not, la-di-da-di-da. It was like, it had already become my religion. It had already become, this is where I go, And so when I got into classical music and I saw, whoa, kind of like everybody in this world thinks of music that way. Everybody in this world it wasn't about the chicks or, and the drugs. This was, people, this is music that aspires to distill all of life into a listening experience. And that's what I wanted music to do, but it was hard in the rock music, world. There was bands that did, I think Led Zeppelin did a great job, and Yes did a, but, my band in California wasn't going to get there. And this seemed like, well, this is a quicker way to get into what I want to get into, where I listen to music, other people listen to music, and I try to be as ambitious as I can. And so I went, having this experience, I went to the head of the music department. This is very similar to your experience. And I said, well, I decided I want to switch my major to music. I want to be a composer. And he said, well, we'll have you sight read a few things and play some prepared pieces. You say you play the guitar. And I said, yeah, but I can't sight read anything because I don't know how to read music. And he laughed at me. You're a nice kid, but you're 20 years old. It's too late. You can't start now. So I went and I would say the same thing, and have said the same thing to people, and prove me wrong. I mean, I tell them my story, So I went away, studied classical guitar. That's where my first guitar lessons, and just learned that, that dot on that space, I can play there, and I already knew, blues guitar player's guide to music theory. I mean, I knew what major, minor, diminished, augmented. I knew what chords were. I knew what scales were. I knew, what alterations you could, play on chords just from playing, and pre-recording some chord progression. And I was already starting to get into more of a fusion kind of thing, Mahavishnu Orchestra, Chick Corea, Return to Forever, that kind of thing. And so I was already getting into a more sophisticated harmonic language. So that it came pretty easy. And I had good time. So passed the goddamn butter, rhythm wasn't a big deal. So I went and I studied, and the rest is history.
Well, I really, as you were talking, there were a couple of things that, like, if you draw those thought bubbles of like how many times you say one word, and then that bubble's bigger than the other words you use other things. And like the thing that I think you've said several times is like teaching, like, or being taught. Some authority figure in your life, either encouraged you or told you the brutal truth.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I had many experiences in my life where that was the case. But the two that are the most distilled for me were at Yale. When I went to grad school, I felt like completely like a fish out of water. I do not belong here. I still think that when I walk onto Princeton's campus, I'm like, do they know who I am? Like, I am lying to these people.
Me too. I managed to do it and retire and continue to pull the wool over everybody's eyes.
Yeah, and there was one, I went to take the MMA exam, which was the sort of barrier to then get to get your doctorate from Yale eventually. And I went in and I met with the advisor. I won't say the name, but we sat down and they looked at me and they said, "Where'd you go to undergrad?" And I said, "Well, I went to the University of Akron." And they said, "You're going to fail this." And I was like,
Wait a second, no. Stop barking. All right.
it's all right. Noise. It means there's life in the room. That's okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So University of Akron, you're going to fail this.
I'm going to fail this. And I was like, I'm going to prove you wrong. And I proved him right. I failed it miserably. But it was also like, okay, I appreciated that somebody knew the truth in that moment, but wasn't like you should quit everything in your life.
Yeah.
And then I had another teacher who we were in her hearing class, and she had studied with Messiaen and was a big accolade of his, and was like, okay, we're going to listen to the quartet for the end of time. Who doesn't know this piece? And I was the only person in the room to raise my hand. And she looked at me and she's like, my office after class. And I was like, oh my God. I almost just got in my car and drove back to Ohio and was like, I will freelance and play steel. And she sat me down and she sort of like narrated the whole piece. She's like, ooh, and this is just, oh, did you hear that? Like she was just so excited to be the person. And she said, I'm really honored to be the person to push you off into the Messiaen Sea. I'm glad no one else had this chance. And I was like, that is such... As a student, I was so grateful. And I think for you, I'm curious, one of the things that you mentioned, you just retired and you had taught at Princeton for 41 years. 41 years. Yeah. The thing that I was struck by in all of the, like the testimonials and people, like the videos, Alieta's video still sticks in my head a great way, was that your influence on folks, yes, is musical. In terms of like the way they saw you writing music, the process with which you wrote music was important to them. Yes. Mm-hmm. But I think on their deathbed, the thing they're going to talk about is those moments where you as a teacher sat in front of them and didn't force them to go down a path that you knew wasn't going to be helpful, but also were like, here's all the paths. Mm-hmm. Go down one and come back and let me know how it went, And I'm just kind of curious for you as a teacher, I don't even know that I have a great question, but like, how has teaching been something in your life that has really kind of made you who you are as both as a composer? I mean, you're a father, you're all of these things, but like being a teacher, like talk about that for a second. Yeah.
When I'm composing, and if I have a discovery, I right away think of, and I write it down under seminar ideas. I am anxious to share it. Mm. And this goes to, your colleague, Jason, sent a personal video. I wish, I think he intended to send it to be shown at the retirement event, but it's very, very touching. Talks about me as his ski teacher. Mm-hmm. And he regards it as generosity, but I really enjoy like having a revelation, like skiing and then writing up on the chair this. I just realized this. If you, do this with your weight and anticipate, punch your uphill hand downhill to initiate the turn, your skis will follow. You just have to have faith. Mm-hmm. And the same, there's something about, I don't think it's a show-offy thing. It's just it's a genuine joy that I get when I guess it's sort of like sharing a beautiful day. Sometimes if you're some and that goes with the mountains. Blue sky and this architecture of the mountains against the sky. And it's like, and I love skiing by myself, and this is awesome. But it's even better when you've got somebody next to you that you can say, "Isn't this awesome?" And they can say, "Yes, it's awesome," and you can confirm that, right? So that same thing comes back to music, like if I have a revelation about how something might be done, or try this combination of instruments, or try this process. Is that cool? Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, that's cool. And it just sort of I guess part of it's just the validation that it's real.
That you're not crazy. What you're
crazy.
perceiving is not actually insane.
Yeah, and it's just just to get something about a community appreciation of something just makes it more vivid and more real for me. And that's where teaching, every little thought I have, I write down. I got to remember to put this into this class or this course, or So.
What would you say is like one of your biggest? Is there a particular? You don't have to name specific names, but is there an instance as a teacher where you did a good job, but you literally like fist pumped after that lesson, like, or that particular performance of a student's piece where you were like, I actually didn't think they were gonna make it, but they did, like, God damn it, yes, like, is there a moment like that?
There are a bunch of moments like that. For some reason, the first one that came to mind as you started to formulate that question was a lesson I had with a student who was writing beautiful music, but it was withholding something. And it was very pretty and very texturally, like this gossamer, and it was lovely, but it would always stop, it would head to something that was just like a little, deeper, and it would, shy away, and I don't know what kind of mood I was in, but I said, what kind of person do you want to be? Don't be stingy. Look, you're on the verge of doing something that's just, just really heartbreaking and beautiful and cathartic, and you keep, pulling away from it, and just, come on, just maybe you want to be that person, but I don't think so. I think, don't you want to be like the generous, open, even vulnerable person? Yes, there's more chance you can get, criticized for being sentimental if you do what I'm suggesting. But there's also more chance that you might, really change someone's life, even if just for the duration of the piece, where it's like, you might actually get them to feel something that they haven't felt before, that you've never achieved before. And the next piece, this composer actually, really went for it, and it was gorgeous, and it was beautiful, and I felt like, yeah, he didn't need composition lessons, he needed therapy, and I was able to give it to him. That just, who do you want to be?
That's amazing. I a lot of young students. I'm 47, so I'm not 70, but I have enough data now to look for people to look at me and perceive me as like, well, you've got this career doing this thing. Isn't it amazing to play Carnegie Hall? Isn't it amazing to have a Grammy? I see you're sitting behind you on the shelf there. Like yes, but like actually the thing that when I come home at night and I tell my wife about, like this past SOCI, there was this one group that I was working with that had a huge breakthrough on this piece that was really, there was a very, like the material that they were asked to sort of respond to was hidden in a way that I think wasn't helpful for the performers or the composer. And all four of these students just gave this heartbreaking performance of this really, really super quiet piece. It reminded me of like King of Denmark, the Morton Feldman percussion piece with this beautiful text. And that's the stuff that actually at the end of the day, I'm the most proud of. And I'm like, as you were expressing that, then there was something else at your retirement dinner that you mentioned that Paul Lansky was there. Yeah. And in terms of teachers, Paul is somebody that I, have had him on the podcast. He's written me a solo steel drum piece. He's written a couple pieces now. written a ton of stuff for percussion, big influence on the percussion world, the music world in general. He's somebody that was writing computer music with a punch card, and he'd leave it run overnight and come back, and there's 8 seconds of music, or
I was there. I'd walk over to the when I first got here, we'd walk over to the E-Quad together. He'd put in the punch card, and we'd go get a cup of coffee, come back a couple hours later, and listen to. Yes.
I mean, like his music's been sampled by Radiohead, and like there's all of like just. But you told this story about him that you're retiring from an institution like Princeton University, which is an institution around which a lot of people look at and are like, well, there's no way I could ever get in there. There's no, like, I have that same feeling, like I just said, like when I walk on campus. Yeah. And you were talking about feeling a little bit like an imposter. Maybe I'm misremembering about like, playing the guitar and that. Would you mind just telling a little bit of that story? Like, how did Paul change your life as a professional teacher coming to a place like Princeton, from the rock world, from the from the Rolling Stones to Princeton? Like, how did Paul sort of crack that open?
I have a bunch of stories. One I wish I'd told at the retirement dinner, I'll tell you now. And this is just on the human level. Mm-hmm. And I think he did it for my benefit, but maybe not. Doesn't really matter. There was a introduce your new faculty reception cocktail party at Prospect at the faculty club. Mm-hmm. And so new faculty from all the humanities departments were showing up, and the big dean of faculty, the big wigs were there. And I came in and I joined this circle with Paul Lansky, Toni Morrison, Joyce Carol Oates, the dean of faculty, the president of the university. And they were talking about film. And
you were like, shit, I didn't bring my wig from elementary school.
Yeah. and there's wonderful film, Godard, it's probably his best film. And Paul said, has anybody seen Porky's 2?
It's like one of those campiest B movies of all time.
Yeah, yes. Yeah. I mean, the campiest teenage sex romp, and nobody laughed except me, and I lost my shit. I mean, I started cracking up. Anyway, that's dear Paul. But, Paul did so much. I mean, I came to Princeton at the dawn of MIDI. And he knew that I played the electric guitar, and he just kept encouraging me to play the electric guitar. And he was doing some MIDI exploration with some grad students, as part of his electronic music, computer music thing. And Steve, come in and play an electric, lay down a solo. I think I played some of the solo at. You
did, yeah. You held your phone up to the microphone, which I also just in terms of like the technological age we're in right now. You're like, let me just hold my iPhone up to this thing. Like, we have these beautiful speakers, but no, let's listen to it on this little.
Yeah, and it just one of the things that just put me in touch with the guitar again, because I'd repressed the guitar. I was a 12-tone, hardcore. I was Milton Babbitt's replacement, right? So Paul did what he needed to do to say, yeah, you got this job because you speak 12-tone, but you also got this job because I, as by far the youngest person in this department, feel like we need to go in a new direction. And you've got, those old chops, but you're an electric guitar player. Come on, let's see that. Let's see more of that. And so he just kept, anytime there was an opportunity, and then we made a bunch of tunes together. He would just record me improvising, and then he'd edit it and make a piece. He, made a couple pieces, heavy metal and not so heavy metal. Just me improvising, and then he made a piece called Dance Tracks, which is on my solo guitar album, where he just did a backdrop and I made a guitar part for it. Just all these invitations to play, getting me in touch with, the guitar, the physicality of the guitar, getting my from the head down involved in the music making process again. That's who I am. I mean, that's how my music evolved from prize winning student music to a composer with a voice.
Well, can you talk just for I don't want to sidetrack us I want to come back to Paul in a second here, but like again, to sort of draw the parallels to you as a young kid growing up post World War II, can you just like talk to me like I'm two about why someone like Milton Babbitt's music was institutionalized so heavily, and what was that music about? What were they reacting to? Like,
well, yeah. So I mean, Milton Babbitt. We owe a lot to Milton Babbitt because Princeton was the first PhD in composition, and that's because Milton Babbitt went to the faculty. And Milton Babbitt's approach to music was very mathematical and algorithmic and set theory and group theory and permutational theory. Lots of, kind of mathematical operations involved, the M5 transformation, all of these things. And he, articulated this in a way that only he could. It sounded very impressive when and I grew up in college reading all his articles about music and about all these processes. And his disciples, I studied with Don Martino, who wrote articles in that mode. Mm-hmm. And he convinced the faculty at Princeton University that music composition was a serious discipline. It is a serious discipline, mm-hmm. but its seriousness has more to do with like writing a novel or just being a human and being an artist. But that's not going to get you anywhere. In 1946, that wasn't going to get you anywhere for establishing a degree program at a place like Princeton. Mm. So his music was super mathematical. The other side of that, so that's what we owe him. The importance at the time was, the 20th century was a rough century. We had 2 world wars and a Holocaust. The objective cleanliness of his music and the music of other serialist, modernist composers, mm-hmm. It was taboo to do anything that, to have 4 beats in a row or mm-hmm. even. No, I probably could have 2, right. But you couldn't have the 3rd in the same place. Anything that remotely connected, anything that you could remotely march to, right. Was that's too close to nationalism, mm-hmm. and the Nazi Party, nationalist is in the name, right? Yeah. So nationalism, anything that had folk influence, it was all just taboo. People just wanted to stay away from anything like that. And the mathematical purity of what Milton Babbitt did, mm-hmm. And what some Boulez tried to do, it was unassailable. Yeah. And I remember my first couple of years, let me let this dog in. My first couple of years teaching at Princeton, I didn't have tenure yet, keeping my options open. I was asked to be a sabbatical replacement at Columbia. And I remember this one student and, kind of fumbling through his piece. And I was like, I really just don't get this C sharp here. I mean, he opens his backpack and looks at his chart and said, "Nope, that's right." and I said, "Yeah, that's not what I meant." But and there was this kind of unassailability. If you would, I remember these 2 composers, names who I won't mention, 2 senior composers to me, not from Princeton, although they both had been students at Princeton. Mm-hmm. After a concert, and one composer comes up to the other and says, "I didn't get the inside the piano stuff," and the composer of the piece said, "Oh, it was structural." Oh, okay. It's like, so there was this need to be not at all vulnerable. right? To not say anything from the heart, to not say anything that had any kind of subjective risk, and that's what I came into.
Well, it's really
Except for
interesting.
Paul.
Yeah, I mean, but also as I think about Paul's music, and I wish I could go back in time and talk to Milton Babbitt too, just to sort of dig a little bit more under the surface, because Paul's music, at least in my experience, is very emotional and very like you said, the neck down, but there's also, you can see the head up too. Like it's everything. And I'm curious if Milton, I mean, one of the things I've loved about teaching at Princeton and working there and working with all of you is that there is you are a very detailed composer. So there is structure in what you're doing.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And
no, I
same with
didn't
Paul.
chop the head off and just go there. I just started incorporating.
But it's interesting. Like, I wonder if Milton Babbitt had hired Paul as a way to be like, this is actually the future of what needs to happen here, because I see it in Paul. And then Paul is just continuing that lineage. Then you continue it with folks like Dan Truman. Dan Truman continues it with folks like Donica and Drew Reed. Like this sort of ethos at Princeton is something that when I zoom out, I think there's not a style. The style is everything. It can't. Yes.
Yeah.
Let's have the structure, but let's also it is time, for example, like that piece is minutely, there's one 4-bar chunk of improv that Jason gets to do. Yeah. The rest of it is like, you are just hanging on for dear life, but it's about pondering life and death and the passing of time. Like, so anyway, I'm just saying some things that I've perceived to be true about my experience of seeing Princeton in action in real time every day. I'm curious for you, now that you're retired, is there anything that, I mean, one of the things that I'm 47, I'm trying not to think of things that I regret, but think of really shitty moments that I've had that I'm actually kind of grateful for, like trying to find gratitude rather than regret. Is there anything as like, just even as a student or as a performer that you look back on and you're like, whoa, I wish I could take that back, but if I were, I wouldn't be the way I am now? Like, is there any particular, maybe regret is the wrong word, but something that you really, for lack of a better phrase, shat the bed on, but like, never again, and this is why, and I'm going to do it this way now because of this?
Yeah, I don't know if this is what you're looking for, but when I think about, I really shat the bed on that one. I think it didn't have anything to do particularly with Princeton. I was performing this piece, Deal, which I just performed with Jason at the Aspen Festival. And the guitar and the drums are not notated. And the orchestra is fully notated.
You talked about it at SOSI, which was really fascinating.
Yeah, right. And I did a tour of England. They have this thing called the Contemporary Music Network. I don't know if they still have it, but the British Arts Council, groups would apply, and if you get it, you fund a tour. And I went with this group Zaffa, based in Manchester, and we did 8 dates all over England, including the South Bank Centre in London, and all over Newcastle, Leeds, all the kind of university towns. And the last performance was in Manchester, where this group was based, and it was the only performance that was going to be recorded and videoed. And I did this pre-concert talk where I talked about this piece. It's called Deal. We got to deal with talked about the inspiration, and the drummer at this point. The drummer was Joey Barron, and Joey and I, our job is to deal with the orchestra. Think of the orchestra as the topography of life, and there's some disjunctures in there that we are going to try to connect with, and there is some smooth sailing that we're going to try to celebrate. And we're, this is us, but it's a 28 to 32 minute piece, depending on how long your cadenzas are. And I'd say 90 seconds in, I break 2 strings. So I don't know what the fuck notes I'm playing. And I have a floating bridge. So I break two strings, and the other four strings are all out of tune. So I don't, and I can make noise and do wobbles for convincingly for another 5 minutes, but 30 minutes. 30 minutes of just complete bullshit, right? And now I'd even be more able to handle it because I've been getting more into using the guitar and my effects as sound design, and not only an expression of articulate virtuosic playing, but as a soundscape. And I wasn't as experienced with that. This was like the year 2000, and I wasn't as conversant with that. I was still kind of on a kick where I wanted to prove the guitar was a legit instrument along with the violin. But I did what I could for 5 minutes. But then after that, I'm out. I don't know what to do. It was humiliating, and even telling the story, reliving it, is painful. I don't know that I learned anything. I got a thicker gauge. I started using much thicker gauge strings.
Yeah.
And so I don't break strings anymore.
Well, I mean, I think
the other lesson I learned was, if I had to do it again, I would just stop and restart. And just say, you know what? I have to deal with whatever happens except for this. Because you know what? I'm here to give you a musical experience.
Right.
This whole deal business is a metaphor. I'm not going to put you through bullshit, And I did learn from that because I did this double concerto for electric guitar and violin with the Green Umbrella, L.A. Phil. And the violinist broke a string. And, the double concerto electric guitar violin, she broke a string. And the conductor wanted to, finish the movement. And I just, said, no, we're not going to finish the movement. We're going back to the beginning. Jenny's going to change her string. We're not doing this,
Trust me, we're not doing this.
Yeah.
I appreciate you telling that story because I think, as you were telling it, there's a couple moments on stage where, Eric and I played Nagoya Marimbas once at the Music Now Festival for 5,000 people. Steve Reich is there. And I don't want to, one of us, it might have been me, I'll accept 50% responsibility for this, moved on to a pattern before we were supposed to. And we hadn't practiced how to get back on. And for about a minute and a half of a 4.5 minute long piece, it was Nagoya Marimba. And I walked off stage and Steve was standing there and people stood up and went bonkers.
Yeah.
And which was even worse. Had they booed, I would have been like, thank you. At least I deserved it.
Right.
I walk on the stage and Steve is standing there and he just goes, happens to the best of us. And so again, it's like it changed the way I prepare for things, but it's also nice to know when you walk on stage actually what the true possibilities are. Like if you walk on thinking things are always going to be amazing, you're always going to get a good whatever. That's a terrible way to go through life and live performance. I have one more question for you, then I'll let you go, Steve. You had mentioned memoir earlier, and the piece you mentioned is about your mother and it's the sort of memoir that she wrote. And you mentioned she's an alcoholic and sort of, as you were premiering that piece, I was writing a piece with my friend Ain Gordon called Relics and Their Humans. Was about my mom as a caretaker, taking care of my dad when he was dying of Lou Gehrig's disease over a 3-year period from 2006 to 2009. And it was based on a podcast that I did with my mom. We just used the entire transcript. So it was my mom's words, and Ain was playing my mom. And one of the things I'm curious to ask you that I don't know that very many people have this particular viewpoint of, like, editing your life and editing the truth so that it goes on stage in a way that artistically makes sense, that is incredibly vulnerable. But also there's some stuff that at least in my experience, I was like, I'm not letting that out of the box. That's not fair to my dad, or that's not fair to my mom. And I don't want to speak for you in your experience with memoir, but can you just talk a little bit about what was it like? Because again, you're 10. It's not like you are at 70 remembering how you got from 10 to 70. Like it just happened in stages. Like you're still that kid. And I'm curious, as a son, what was it like to sort of pour over all that stuff that you remembered putting headphones on because that was an escape, and now you're turning it into this thing with all these amazing musicians, and you've got this career behind you. Would you mind just sort of talking me through that a little bit?
It was this is one of the privileges of being a composer. I mean, that I can take something like that, my mother's memoir, which I'd sort of thumbed through, and there's delightful anecdotes in there. It's funny, and my mother never went to college, had a high school education, but she and her writing sort of shows that, but in the best way. She's an intelligent person, no frills, just tells a story, tells it like it is, and it opens. And there's an uneducated but still appreciation of language. The first line, you open up her memoir, it says, "My name, after 2 marriages and 1 divorce, is Elaine Ethel Ostland Carter Ostland Mackey," which is, what a great way to open a memoir. It says a lot, and it's got a sort of a poetry to it. I could have only written that piece. I wrote that piece 5 years ago, so I was 65. I could only have written that piece as an old man. I mean, eligible for Medicare. I could not have written that piece when I was your age, because, and you got another 20 years to go, and you'll find that some of the stuff that you accept yourself. I mean, I've got a lot more years behind me than I do ahead of me. And that hasn't always been the case, And it's just stuff just sort of says, it doesn't matter. And what matters is that same instinct that I'm talking about, that sunny day, in Utah, where it's just cooler if you can turn to something like, "Isn't this beautiful?" Similarly with, things that, my mother said, or her life, the way she died. And she had, and that story is ultimately triumphant, right? Because she was sober the last 30 years of her life after some really dark times, some really dark events, and some, hitting rock bottom. They say alcoholics have to hit rock bottom. She absolutely hit rock bottom. And having lived with rock bottom, and at a time being embarrassed of that and self-conscious about that, and analyzing self-conscious about myself, as an adult child of an alcoholic and Al-Anon veteran, but at a certain point it sort of melts away, and it becomes a privilege to be a composer. Look what I get to do. I get to make this thing check this out. This is beautiful, and it's sad, and you're going to laugh, and you're going to cry, and it's going to give you an insight into life, and you're going to think about things differently, maybe, And wow, what a privilege for me to be able to do that. I could go to a therapist, I could do lots of things, but I spent a year and a half, as you say, editing, curating my mother's life. Now, it had to live on stage. I used 5% of her memoir, and I had to create an arc that I hung on her alcoholism, on her innocence, the kind of antecedents, causes leading her to be a drink. She didn't have her first drink until she was 25 years old. And then boom, the allergy, the addiction, and the, all those stories. And there's lots of other stories. Oh man, it could have hung on a whole different arc about sexism in the 20th century, and the multiple attempted rapes, and the back alley abortions she had. Could have hung on that. I didn't include that, not because that's too. It's because I wanted to keep this piece down to an hour and 20 minutes, and I wanted to have a palpable arc. There's still another arc with these other things in there, and they're in there in the sense of embodied in this struggling alcoholic, But ultimately, God, it's trivial to even say I've made my peace. I have so made my peace. I have, the bottom line is, before doing this project, the memoir, my mother was, I've said, I say this, as an introduction to the piece often. My mother was a supporting character in my movie. After having done memoir, I, for the first time, realized she had a life of her own. She was the star of her own movie. It's like the way you began this, thinking about when you were 10 and realizing, holy shit, Steve was 10 once, And it's like, holy shit, my mother was, all these things. Her emotions were just as real to her as mine are to me. And that casts a broader, lens on to, in terms of empathy to the whole world. That, one of the things I often say, is like, our history was their present. Think about Beethoven, our history was his present. And your, lady walking her dog out in front of my house right now, she's just a prop in my movie. And then I realize, she's somebody's mother or somebody's daughter, or somebody could curate her life and realize that she's the star of her own life. And we should, respect that. She's a star. So,
Steve, yeah. I can't think of a better way to, and I wish we could just do 4 more hours of this. I was tearing up a little bit as you were describing that, because I think for me doing the project about my mom and my dad, the way you put it in a much better way that I think I'm going to try to paraphrase in the future. But I realized my mom was a person.
Yeah,
she wasn't my mom that I was mad at because of curfew or whatever. Like, she was a person, and and just the complications of being a person is fucking hard, Steve.
Yeah, yeah.
And anyway,
and we often think of those they're props, and they're a little bit emptier than us.
Yeah,
they're not. They're absolutely every bit as full as we are.
Well, Steve Mackey, I am so grateful for your generosity of your spirit, your time, your talents. With getting to work with you and so is such a blessing. And I know we got some projects cooking in the oven.
Yeah, we got a big concerto coming up.
But I think it's fair to say that stuff is going to be fun. But it's like these are the things that I think I'll remember when I'm on my deathbed. And I'm just so grateful that you shared all this stuff. And for anybody who's listening, I'll speak for them that it's nice to hear this side of you, and I'm just really grateful. So I'll let you go to your 2:00 meeting. Tell Sarah and everybody I said hey, and we'll talk to you soon, buddy.
All right, thanks,
Steve. Bye. All right, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. Again, I'll just say it for the 4,000th time. Talking to people, even people I know really well, one-on-one, always reveals something new that I didn't know about them, and also stuff I didn't know about myself. So I hope you are out there doing that. Steve, thank you so much for your time and your generosity. Really appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to continuing to play your music for the rest of my life. So everybody else, take care. I hope you're doing well out there. Hope you're having conversations. We'll talk to you soon. Love you. Bye.